whether or not felons should be checked and verified when they're about to vote, and how that list is administered, and what the local auditors are supposed to do with it. So we have a letter from Cerro Gordo County Auditor Ken Klein, who is a Republican, who highlights in his letter the process that took place in the 2012 election. He had a list of felons that he routinely uses to verify when somebody comes to him to check in to vote. There were names that were identified. The procedures are then, if you're not a registered voter and you're there to do same-day registration, and there's a question of your voting status under the federal HAVA Act, no voter leaves without casting a ballot. And the final step of that is a provisional ballot. So that's what these suspected felons did. After the election, and then in the ensuing week before the county canvasses the vote, which is kind of the official count, Ken Klein indicates in his letter that he asked Secretary Schultz to verify the status again of those people, and got a response back from the Secretary of State's office that they were indeed felons on the list and did not have a right to vote. So they were informed that their votes were not counted. So the provisional ballots then are never put into the vote count. This is a serious issue. We believe as
you're saying that they were valid, they should have been counted.
they were denied the right to vote wrongly.
They were legitimate voters.
They should have been legitimate, legal, registered voters if the list had been accurate.
And the list was not
The
accurate.
list was inaccurate. We consider this a serious violation of people's rights to vote. And our basic principles in the Senate over the last few years when it comes to election law is that we believe Iowa should have the most secure, accurate, and efficient election system in the country without disenfranchising a single voter. So we think you should balance both and be 100% accurate in both judgments. If somebody is not eligible to vote, we ought to have a system that answers that. If somebody is eligible to vote, we ought to have a system that doesn't make the ultimate mistake of wrongly denying them the right to vote. In this case, that's what happened to 3 Iowans that we're aware of. If you read the letter, there's potentially 46,000 Iowans on this list of supposed felons in Iowa that the Secretary of State uses to inform the local county auditors. It's highly likely that this could have happened to more Iowans. What we would like to do going forward in light of this new information and the seriousness of it, denying somebody the right to vote who should have been able to, we're going to call the Secretary of State before the State Government Committee next week in person and go through questions that senators have about this particular incident, and then any other process related to how he informs local county auditors about who's eligible to vote and who are not. We will reserve the right to take proactive action, offer solutions, different administrative processes, improve the accuracy of the list, whatever it takes to ensure that if an Iowan is eligible to vote, they get the chance to do that. I've already contacted his office, spoke to Charlie Smithson. Charlie has agreed to do everything they can to be here next week. We have 2 committee slots already for next week, but we will remain on call and available as a state government committee so that the secretary, whatever his schedule, yes, whatever schedule, but we'd like to do it sooner rather than later, but we will do everything we can to ensure that we fit the secretary's schedule into the Senate state government's ability to meet. So we'll be on call basically we're going to offer the 3 o'clock meeting on Monday. If they can't do that, then we'll be available. We want to get to the bottom of it. We want to get to the bottom of it right away. We consider it that serious of a violation of people's voting rights that we've got to figure out what happened, how the lists are actually generated, what are his inputs, and how to improve the process. If you read Ken Klein's letter, he offers 2 suggestions. And Senator Courtney's with us here today because he's a member of state government. He's also been a past member of oversight and has followed this issue fairly closely. And he will be the lead on the state government committee for any proactive legislation that we offer as a result of what we've learned here.
So do you see any need to review the 46,000 names on that list?
Absolutely. We believe there are 98 county auditors right now who should help us and be proactive in that process. As we understand it, the list could potentially, it either comes from the parole board or the Department of Corrections. If you read the letter, the reason this came to light is because the DCI agent, in trying to figure out if they were eligible voters or not based on being on the felon list, discovered that these 3 individuals were actually eligible. And he, in the letter, describes how that was discovered. Well, the DCI agent is under contract with the Secretary of State, essentially works for him on that project, and but for his willingness to inform County Auditor Klein that this has happened to 3 people, we don't see an internal process that the Secretary of State would have willingly told us about this. We think that should be a part of the transparency of how those lists are collected, how they're communicated to the auditors, and in this case it's almost happenstance that it was discovered. If you read the letter, the DCI agent sort of was I don't think he had a duty to report it to the county auditor, because if you read the letter, it sounds like he said, hey, you need to be aware that these 3 people were actually eligible.
So how did you find out about it?
The letter was sent to me yesterday by Ken Klein, as he sent it to the Secretary of State's office. He's probably aware that I work on these issues.
Okay, so I guess one question I have here is there like a violation of civil rights or a violation of federal law here? Is this something we're going to, for example, refer to the U.S. Attorney's Office?
Well, this is why we think a hearing is important next week, so we can address those kinds of questions. I think those are secondary to answering the question of how somebody could have been denied those rights in the first place. What are our own Iowa answers to that, and then any of those other things we'll
But some of those people on the ballot were federal, running for federal offices, Bill, so potentially that could be a federal issue as well, because of the federal offices.
They're all interrelated. You're relying on the chief of elections, i.e. the Secretary of State, to have accurate information. So this is an example of why those of us who worked on elections law believe that you can do both. Be very, very cautious and accurate about who you say cannot vote based on our own laws. At the same time, trying to find out and doing all of your steps along the way to make sure that somebody who's not eligible doesn't get to as well. You ought to be equally as accurate in both analysis.
And it was a process that the DCI was looking to see if there was fraud committed here, but discovered that the opposite happened.
Yes.
That a legitimate vote had been cast and rejected.
They were disenfranchised because they were wrongly on the list. And so, yeah, the initial reason the DCI agent was looking into it was to make a determination if they truly had broken the law. Discovered that not only had they not broken the law, they were eligible to vote, and the votes had been
They were not felons?
They were not felons under the definition that would preclude them from voting.
One had not been found guilty of a felony. One had his rights restored by Governor Vilsack.
And the third had it reduced to a misdemeanor.
Exactly.
which the DCI agent is you
So two
layer
are not
more
felons
information.
and one had voting rights restricted.
Right.
And that was by Culver Vilsack? By Vilsack.
And that's outlined in the letter too,
Okay,
so you
that's
can
fine.
use that for
Okay.
It's my feeling that everyone in this state who's eligible to vote ought to be allowed to vote and their vote ought to count. And in this case, that would happen.
right.
Right.
And our administrative system ought to honor the values of security, efficiency, and accuracy without disenfranchisement. We can do this. And those of us who criticize some of the procedures that the Secretary of State has used, sort of a dragnet policy, a list, 46,000 people, it would be difficult to believe that that would be 100% accurate, and yet it's been used now by county auditors to basically make a decision whether somebody can vote or not. With a time crunch, keep this in mind, this all happens within a week of the vote because the canvass has to be done. So if you're a county auditor, you can understand why they're rechecking with the Secretary of State, is this true? Because I'm about to tell this person that their vote was not counted for those reasons. And then, obviously, if it's illegal, you turn it over to the county
Do you have
attorney
the
as
names
well.
of these people?
I do not. That might be something that Ken Klein would have, or the Secretary of State's office itself.
It used to be there was a 10-day window when registrations closed that they could check this kind of thing before the election. Now it's same-day registration.
Right.
That puts that pressure on more. So
Well, you still have the fail-safe with the